Today's daf is Chulin daf Yud Zayin, and we are 14 lines from the bottom of daf Tez Zayin Amid Beis, the two dots, Hakoil Shoichten, Ula Oilam Shoichten. Today's daf is being learned as a Schus Refuah Shalema for Eliezer Yeshaya ben Brach. So, Chulin daf Yud Zayin is a daf, I know we've said this a lot recently, that requires an asterisk next to it. In fact, in the world of raid, Chulin daf Yud Zayin is one of the dafin with the Hey Ayadiyah. It's something that comes up a lot, and as a result, I think it requires a tiny bit of an introduction. In Parshas Re'eh, this is in Perek Yud Beis Pasuk Chaf. The Pasuk says, Ki yarchiv Hashem alikecha es gvulcha kasher diber lach. When the Yidden are going to enter Eretz Yisrael, va'amarta, you're going to say, Oichla basar, I want to eat meat, ki sa'av nafshecha lechol basar, because you're going to have a taiva to just have a piece of meat. B'chol avas nafshecha toichal basar. Says the pasuk, feels a little wordy, that if you so desire, no worries, you're allowed to eat meat. In the event that you're going to be in the land of Canaan, you're going to be in Eretz Yisrael, but you're going to be far from the place that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to decide and choose to place His name there. Meaning you're going to be far from Yerushalayim, you're going to be far from the Makam HaMikdash. You can shecht from your bakar and your tzayin that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave you, and do it the way I commanded you and instructed you to do it, and after you do that, meaning after you shecht your animals, then you're allowed to eat it b'chalavas nafshecha exactly how you want. You should know that this food that you're going to desire to eat and you're going to shecht wherever it is you might be, you can eat it the same way you eat today the tzvi and the ayil, so too you'll be able to eat that. You're going to be able to eat it if it's in a state of tumah, you'll be able to eat it if it's in a state of taira. What's the point of this pasuk? Kachim, we know, has to be eaten in a state of taira. But the pasuk says that when you're going to enter the land of Canaan and you're going to want to eat a piece of meat, shech the meat, and when you shech the eat, you can eat it, and you can eat it the same way you eat the tzvi and the ayil. The tzvi and the ayil are not animals that went on the mizbeach. Thus, you can eat them in a state of tumah or in a state of taira. All that meat that you're going to eat when you enter the land, you'll be able to eat again in a state of tumah or in a state of taira. The pasuk continues and says, Rak chazak, just make sure, be careful, be strong. The vilti achoil hadam, don't eat any blood. Ki adam hu hanefesh, because the blood has in it the soul of the animal. V'lo yisaychal hanefesh im habasar, and it's inappropriate to eat the soul of the animal. Lo yitachlenu, again, don't eat it. Ala aretz tishbechenu kamayim. What you should do is you should let it spill on the ground. Lo yitachlenu, again, the pasuk says, don't eat it. And then the pasuk says, Rak, what I told you now is all related to your chulin. But as it relates to kadashecha, ashiyu l'cha nidarecha, as it relates to any kachim that you're going to have, tisa, that you should carry, uvasa, and you should bring with you ala makam ashiyivcha Hashem, to the place that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to choose, v'asisa iloisecha habasav adam al mizbach Hashem alokecha. And when you bring the kachim, then there's going to be a mizbeach component, and some of the basar is going to go on the mizbeach, and some of the blood's going to go on the mizbeach. V'dam zvachecha yishafech al mizbach Hashem alokecha v'abasar toichel shmar v'shamatas kol advarim ha'el asher anochi mitzavecha. Be careful. Make sure you heed everything I'm telling you. L'man yitav lecha ulevanecha acharecha ad olam ki sasa hatoy v'yashar be'enei Hashem alokecha. 9 psukim tucked away in Parshas Re'eh that deal with what it's going to be like to be a Jew, an observant Jew, in the holy land of Eretz Yisrael. And Moshe Rabbeinu tells Klal Yisrael that when you're going to enter the land, if you're going to ever be in a situation where you're going to want a piece of meat, that's okay. Stating that you have to know that you have to shech the meat before you're going to eat it. And by the way, that meat you can eat wherever you want. There's no requirement of where you could eat that meat. Anywhere you want to eat it is going to be fine. Stating that when it comes to kachim, then the rule is Rak Kodashecha Shiyu L'cho Nedarecha. That's Tisa Uvasa El Hamakam Hashiyivcha Hashem, and then Vasisa Ilasecha Basav Adam Dafka on the Mizbeach. That has to be done in a specific place. Clearly, these psukim are very relevant to what it is we're learning now. We're learning Masechtas Chulin, and these psukim deal with the laws of Basar Chulin and the laws of Shchitas Chulin. But it seems very clear, just from reading the psukim, that there was some before and after, that whatever this pasuk is describing was nischadish when the Yidden entered Eretz Yisrael. In fact, the way the parasha begins is ki yarchev Hashem Elokecha es gvulcha kashadi belach. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to expand your boundaries, meaning you're going to enter the land of Canaan, and you're going to say you want a piece of meat, that's where you have these 9 psukim, that's where everything is going to go into effect. As if to say, what it says in these psukim right here was only true once the Yidden entered the land of Canaan. But before they entered the land of Canaan, whatever we're describing in these psukim was not true. Now, at first glance, doesn't sound like there's much of a chiddush here. What does the pasuk say? You're going to enter the land of Canaan. You're going to be in the mood of a piece of meat. Says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, no worries. You can have your meat. But at the same time, just make sure that you're going to shecht the meat. Eat it wherever you want, but don't confuse it with kachim, because kachim has a very special place that it needs to be eaten and brought. And oh, by the way, then the blood has to go on the mizbeach, and there's even certain basar that's going to have to go on the mizbeach. There's nothing here that's very earth-shattering. Nothing, I think, very noteworthy. What exactly is nischadish in this parsha? What is it that the Torah is saying? It's then and only then that all these laws are going to apply. And there was a major machlokes Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva, a tremendous machlokes Tanam, how to understand what the chiddush of this parsha is. Rabbi Shmuel said, you know what this pasuk is telling me? The pasuk is telling me that when you're going to enter the land of Canaan and you're going to say you want a piece of meat, you're going to be able to eat a piece of meat. As opposed to when the Yidden were in the Midbar, as opposed to right now in real time, the way it's been for 40 years, says Moshe Rabbeinu to Klal Yisrael, then you were not allowed to eat a piece of meat. Because when the Yidden were in the Midbar, it was usher for them to eat basar taiva. So what if they want to eat a piece of meat? There was an option. You could always bring a carbon, and you'll be able to eat from the meat of the carbon. By the way, which carbon would you have to bring? So we know kachim, it's easy. Only a oila and a shlamim are brought beneda benedava, and the oila was kulay kalal. All the meat went on the mizbech. So bring a carbon shlamim, and you bring a carbon shlamim like this to be able to eat a piece of meat. And that is what this parsha is saying. That whereas up until now, when you were in the midbar, right? Mishnah Torah is the 40th year of the Yidden in the midbar. So up until this point, you were in the midbar, you were not allowed to have a piece of meat. However, you should know good days are coming. Ki yarchev Hashem alekecha es gvulcha kashedi berlach v'amarta oichla basar. B'chal avas nafshecha teicha basar. It's going to be okay, stating that shechted the same way you shecht kachim, the same way you shechted your shlamim. Now, before you ate a piece of meat, I want you to go ahead and shecht the chulin as well. But the chiddush of this parasha is that when the Yidden were in the midbar, they were not allowed to eat basar taiva. They weren't allowed to eat basar because they simply had a taiva to eat the basar. You had to bring a carbon, and only then were you able to eat from the basar, the carbon. But when you're going to come to Eretz Yisrael, then it's going to change. Rabbi Akiva said, no way. When the Yidden were in the midbar, if they wanted to eat basar taiva, they were allowed to eat basar taiva. So what was being nischadish in this parsha? What was being nischadish in this parsha is that if you're going to want to eat basar taiva when you come to Eretz Yisrael, you're going to have to shecht it first. The chiddush is ki yirchak mimcha amokem ash yivcha Hashem elokecha lasim shmo sham v'zavachta mipkarchu mitzoincha shenasan Hashem lecha kasher tzivisicha. That's the chiddush. What do you mean? What happened in the midbar? If somebody wanted to eat a piece of meat, he didn't have to shecht it? Correct. Rabbi Akiva says, when the Yidden were in the midbar, for 40 years, they were allowed to eat in the vernacular basar nechira. So nechira is where something happens to the simanim of the animal, but it didn't happen in the shchita dig away. Yes, during those 40 years, they were allowed to eat meat. They didn't eat shchita. And what's being nischadish in this parasha is that moving forward, once you come to the land of Canaan, there's going to be a halacha that you're going to have to shecht. So according to Rabbi Yishmael, the pshut pshutai shel mikra of the pasuk is that up until now you're not allowed to eat basar taiva. Kamashmal on akula, that moving forward you're going to be allowed to eat basar taiva. According to Rabbi Akiva, up until now, of course you were allowed to eat basar taiva. You were even allowed to eat basar nechira. You didn't have to do a shchita. What's the punchline of this parasha? Kamashmal on a chumrah, that moving forward you're going to have to shecht, and then and only then are you going to be able to eat. So according to Rabbi Shmuel, the ikar of the parasha is the heter of basar taiva. According to Rabbi Akiva, the ikar of the parasha is the chumrah, that the laws of shchita moving forward are going to apply to any chulin that a person is going to want to eat. It's interesting, if you look at the Rishonim al HaTorah, Rashi, the Ramban, Rabbeinu Bachya, pick your Rishon. Every single one of the Rishonim say that as it relates to the Pshutai Shal Mikra, if we were learning Chumash here right now, the way we would be mifarish these psukim is like Rabbi Yishmael. All the Rishonim say it, that the Pshutei Shal Mikra is very mashma like Rabbi Yishmael. That really the chiddush of this parasha is that you're going to enter the land, va'amarta oichla basar, ki sa'ava nafshecha lecha basar, v'chalavas nafshecha toicha basar. That's the real chiddush. Now the Torah says you have to shecht it. Of course you have to shecht it. But the chiddush is that if you want to eat basar taiva, you're going to be allowed to eat basar taiva. So all the Rishonim say that the Pshutei Shal Mikra is mashma like Rabbi Yishmael. But when you learn Chulin Daf Yud Zayin, can't just learn Shitas Rabbi Yishmael. We have to be aware of side the Shita of Rabbi Yishmael, side the Shita of Rabbi Akiva. Another thing that's worth mentioning now that Be'ez Hashem we're going to get to in the raid, and that is there's another parsha in the Torah that very much is impacted based on this machlokes between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva, which makes this fascinating because you have two parashas in the Torah. We just mentioned one. Devarim Perek Yud Beis. We're going to have a little bit of a cliffhanger in terms of what the other parish is. We'll get to that in the raid. But there's another parish, I'll give it away. Vayikra Perek Yud Zayin, which also mentions a whole inyan, and really depending on whether you take the position of Rabbi Yishmael or you take the position of Rabbi Akiva, what would emerge is two diametrically opposed ways of understanding the parsha. Absolutely fascinating. The background to this machlokes, Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Akiva, is the Daf Gemara, or at least the overwhelming majority of the Daf Gemara that we are about to learn right now. So let's dive in without brief introduction. So again, the Mishnah on Daf Tesvav Amud Beis said that as it relates to Shchitas Chulin, Hakol Sheichtin, Ula Oilam Sheichtin, Uba Koil Sheichtin. Rashi in the Mishnah said, Kula Mefarish B'Gemara. We're up to that Gemara right now, where the Gemara is going to explain what all of these things mean. Says the Gemara, Hakol Sheichtin. What does it mean, Hakol Sheichtin? Sak the Gemara, Hakol B'Shchita. What it means is that anything that you want to eat, you have to shecht first. L'Rabbi what? Va'afilu oif. Even an oif. Meaning not only bakar and tzayin require shchita, but even an oif requires shchita as well. Lo'olam sheichtin. What does that mean? Says the Gemara, Mantana. I'll tell you what it means. You want to know who the Tana of the Mishnah is, who said lo'olam sheichtin, and you want to know what the words lo'olam sheichtin mean. Amar Rabbi. Rabbi said Rabbi Yishmael. It's Rabbi Yishmael. Which Rabbi Yishmael? That Rabbi Yishmael. The Rabbi Yishmael that we just mentioned in the introduction to the daf. So this should be Hashem go quickly now because we just overemphasized it a little bit in the introduction. The Tanya we learned in the Brayso, it says Ki yarchav Hashem alekechas gvulcha kasher diber lach va'amarta oichla basa v'goymer, and the v'goymer is the next 9 psukim in the Torah. Rabbi Shmuel said that the purpose of that pasuk is to teach us that when the Yidden entered Eretz Yisrael, they were allowed to eat basa taiva. Why? Because initially, when the Yidden were in the Midbar, they were not allowed to eat basa taiva. But it was after when they entered Eretz Yisrael, then they were allowed to eat basa taiva. So when the Mishnah says that lo'olam sheichtin, Zok the Rabbi, you know what Rabbi Yishmael is saying? He's saying now that the Yidden went to Galus, unfortunately, mipnei chato'enu, galinu me'artzeinu, v'nisrachaknu me'alad moseinu, now we're in Galus. Yochel, I would have had a havamina yachzeru li'yisur narishon, that maybe we should go back to the original Isser, and maybe we shouldn't be able to eat meat anymore. Maybe we should all go vegan. Just like when the Yidden were in the Midbar before they entered the land. They weren't allowed to eat basa taiva. You could hear there'd be a havamina that now that we're not in the land anymore, maybe it shouldn't be a problem. That's why Rabbi Yishmael, who's the Tana of the Mishnah, said, La'olam sheichtin. No, La'olam sheichtin, you're allowed to eat basar taiva even after we went to Galus. La'olam forever, even after Galus. Maskef Rabbi Yosef. So Rabbi Yosef, whose Rabbi's bar plucked in Shas, he heard what Rabbi said, and he asked him 2 kashas. Number 1, If the punchline is that even after the Yidden were exiled, they're still allowed to eat basar, so what's really the chiddush? Not lo'ilam sheichten, va'oichlin. The chiddush is they're allowed to eat. To the extent they're going to eat, of course they're going to have to do shchita. But the point is, there's no chiddush in the shchita. The chiddush is in the achila. Once lo'ilam oichlin and meila lo'ilam sheichten. But it's ikar chaser. The emphasis should have been on the word oichlin, not on the word sheichten. And besides, it doesn't make any sense, said Rav Yosef, to suggest the Havamina that when the Yidden entered Eretz Yisrael, it was mutter for them to eat basar taiva, but then when they went into Galus, it would have been usher. Why? Because just think about it for a second. What is the reason the basar taiva was usher to the Yidden when they were in the Midbar, but yet when they entered Eretz Yisrael, it became mutter? The reason obviously is Mishum Dahavim Mekarva the Mishkan. Because when the Yidden were in the Midbar, they were very close to the Mishkan. So if you wanted to eat meat, we don't have to be matter basar taiva. Just bring a carbon shlam and you'll be able to eat from the basar shlam. Why is it that when the Yidden entered the land of Canaan, it became mutter? It's because now already they were far from the Mishkan. Now, how does Rabbi Yosef know that? Because he's reading the Psukim. The pasuk says, "Ki yarchiv Hashem alekeches gvulcha kashadi belach." Right, when you're going to conquer this very, very large land, and you're going to want to eat a piece of meat, and you're going to be far away, right? Next pasuk says it even more clearly. If you're going to be far away from the Makam HaMikdash and you're going to want to eat a piece of meat, so what exactly are you going to do? So says Rabbi Yosef, I'm just reading the Psukim. The Psukim seem to suggest that the reason that there was a before and after as it relates to basar taiva had nothing to do with, Kedushas Eretz Yisrael versus Tumas Eretz Ha'amim. This is not mitzvahs atluyus ba'aretz. This is not trumas or ma'asros. It's just related to a very practical thing. When the Yidden were close to the Makam HaMikdash, there's no reason for there to be a heter basar taiva. When they're far away, they need the heter. Well, if that's the case, for kolshkein hashta, darchikul utfei, once Yidden went into Galus, well, we're even further away. By the way, it's not even that we're far away. We don't even have the option anymore to bring karbanos. So if that's the case, certainly without a question in the world that the halacha should be that according to Rabbi Yishmael, it would be mutter to eat basar taiva, and I shouldn't need a Mishnah to tell me la'olam sheichten that even after we went to Galus, still it's going to be okay. So Rabbi said that when it says la'olam sheichten, the time of the Mishnah is Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael holds that when the Yidden were in the Midbar, there was an issa basar taiva. It became mutter when they entered Eretz Yisrael. Now that we went to Galus again, I would think that maybe it's going to go back to that issa that they had in the Midbar. Kamash malam la'olam sheichten. Fake Rabbi Yosef, two kashas. Number one, the emphasis is not lo'ilam sheichten. It should be lo'ilam sheichten v'oichlin. You even mentioned the word oichlin. Kasha number two, what's the havamina that when they went to Galus, all of a sudden it should be aser? If the issa is related to chutz la'aretz, it's related to not being in the land, memela. But the issa is related to the fact that you're close by. Well, now that we left the land, we're even farther away than we were when we were in the land. So there's no svar in the world to say that the Tana, the Mishnah is Rabbi Yishmael, and there's some chiddush in the world of Rabbi Yishmael, the Olam Sheichten, Elam Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef said just the opposite of Rabbi. He said, Rabbi Akiva, you want to know the Tana of the Mishnah is Rabbi Akiva. The Tanya we learned in a Braisa, Ki yirchak mimcha amakam ishav because of Elu Leslim Basa Nechira. The purpose of this pasuk is to tell me that there's an Isser to eat Basa Nechira. Because when the Yidden went to Midbar Hutel and Basa Nechira, they were allowed to eat Basa Nechira. When they entered the land, Nesel and Basa Nechira. At that point, it became Asati Basa Nechira. Again, Rabbi Akiva learns. The punchline of this pasuk is the second pasuk. V'zavachta mipkarcha u'mitzayncha asher nasan Hashem l'cha kasher tzivisicha. V'ach shev shegalo says Rabbi Yosef. So you want to know the Mishnah is it's Rabbi Akiva, and this is what Rabbi Akiva is telling. He's telling you that now that the Yidden went to Galus, Yochel Yachzu L'Tein Rishon, I would think that maybe we should go back to the original heter. Meaning what? You should be allowed to eat basa nechira again. Because when the Yidden were in the Midbar, they were allowed to eat basa nechira. They went to Eretz Yisrael. Now all of a sudden, v'zavachta. Now kasher tzivisicha. Now there's a hilchah shchita. Oh, now that they're out of the land again, so maybe there should be a heter basa nechira. L'kach shaninu la'olam sheichten. that no, you always have to shecht, and the reason you always have to shecht is because once the Yidden entered the land, at that point the laws of shechita went into effect, and it would remain with us at Bias Koil Tzedek. But the point is, says Rav Yosef, the Tana of the Mishnah is not Rabbi Yishmael, just the opposite. It's Rabbi Yishmael's Baal Plukta Rabbi Akiva, and the La'olam Sheichten is, you would have thought that being that before they entered the land, there was heter to eat basa nechira. So maybe nach the galus, there's also a heter to eat basa nechira. That's the kamash malon la'olam sheichten. Now, had Rabbi Yosef answered the two questions that he had on Rabbah? So the first question was la'olam sheichten, la'olam sheichten, va'oichlem mibayale. That's a kasha if you learn the Mishnah's going according to Rabbi Yishmael, where the emphasis is, could you eat basa nechira or basa taiva? Could you not eat basa taiva? So the dagush is on the oichlin. The Mishnah doesn't say oichlin. Oh, but if you learn that the Mishnah is going according to Rabbi Akiva, what's the emphasis? Could you eat not basa taiva, but could you eat basa nechira? Do I have to do shchita? Do I not have to do shchita? Of course, you can eat. The question is, could you eat without a shchita, or do I need a shchita? The kamash malon is that you have to do a shchita. Hence, the word la'olam sheichten is the right word. Second Kash obviously is answering. He didn't understand how could it could be a havamina that we would go back to a iser basa taiva after the Yidden went to Galus. If you learn the Mishnah is going according to Rabbi Akiva, then obviously we never even entertained such a havamina, but rather, the whole chiddush was in the world of Rabbi Akiva. So the bottom line is, we introduced the daf with this machlokes Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Akiva. What does it have to do with the beginning of Masechtas Chulin? Because the Mishnah said, La'olam sheichten. We have a machlokes Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef, what the chiddush of La'olam sheichten is. Specifically, Rabbi was mefarish La'olam sheichten al libid Rabbi Yishmael, and Rabbi Yosef was mefarish La'olam sheichten al libid Rabbi Akiva. According to Rabbi, La'olam sheichten is coming to teach me that even after the Yidden went into Galus, they were still allowed to eat basa taiva. When the Yidden were in the Midbar, they weren't allowed to eat basa taiva. It became mutter in Dvarim Perek Yud Beis Pasuk Chaf. Now that they left the land, you would have thought that maybe they should go back to the original Isser, Kamash Malon La'olam Sheichten, and like the Gemara pointed out, really the Chiddush is not so much La'olam Sheichten, it's La'olam Sheichten Va'oichlin. Rabbi Yosef learned that the Mishnah, the Tana of the Mishnah, is really Rabbi Akiva. And the Chiddush of La'olam Sheichten is not that you're allowed to eat. There would have never been a havamina that you're not allowed to eat. And if that's what the chiddush was, it would have said something about oichlin. But rather, the chiddush is that you have to do shchita even now that we're in Galus. Why would you think not? Because before we entered the land, we didn't have to do shchita. Because in the midbar, there was a heter basa nechira. When did the laws of shchita go into effect? That's in Parshas Rei Perek Yud Beis Pasuk Chaf Aleph, right? That's the pasuk that says V'yos zavachta mitkarch mitzayincha Hashem nasan Hashem l'cha kasher tzivisicha. Voltich gewollt meinen that maybe even after the Golus, this should be true as well. Kamash Malan, that's not going to be the okay. Says the Gemara. But my kamiflagi, what exactly is the machlokes between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva? And the Gemara states sort of the obvious. It's obvious, but take a look at Tosfos Dibra Maskal Rabbi Akiva. But either way, sort of the obvious, and that's Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva holds basa taiva yitzar klal. Rabbi Akiva holds that when the Yidden were in the midbar, there was no iser basa taiva. Rabbi Yishmael said basa nechira la yishturi klal. Rabbi Yishmael is that when the Yidden were in the midbar, there was no heter basa nechira. In other words, what the Gemara is saying is that Rabbi Yishmael clearly disagrees with Rabbi Akiva's understanding of what went on in the Midbar, and Rabbi Akiva very much disagrees with Rabbi Yishmael's understanding of what went on in the Midbar. According to Rabbi Yishmael, what was the chiddush in the Midbar for those 40 years? You weren't allowed to eat basa taiva. Rabbi Akiva holds basa taiva lo yitzar klal. According to Rabbi Akiva, what was the grace of chiddush of the 40 years in the Midbar? You were allowed to eat basa nechira. Rabbi Yishmael sava basa nechira lo yishtari klal. The Gemara now is going to be mafalfala, but it says Bishlam, the Rabbi Yishmael Bishlam, according to Rabbi Yishmael, that says that there was never a heter to eat basa nechira in the midbar. There was always a din shchita. Shchita was not nischadish in Parshas Rei. Well, if that's the case, hainu d'chsiv v'shachat as ben abakar. I understand. The pasuk says v'shachat as ben abakar. Where does it say that? It's the 5th pasuk in Teiras Kayanim, right in the beginning of the laws of Kachim, the Karban Oila, v'shachat as ben abakar. El Rabbi Akiva, my v'shachat. But according to Rabbi Akiva, v'shachat as ben abakar. Why are you doing shchita with the ben habakar? I thought shchita was first nischadish when the Yidden were in the midbar. I thought there was a heter. when the Yidden entered Eretz Canaan. I thought there was a het to Bas Nechira when the Yidden were in the Midbar. So the Gemara, Kachim shiny. Kachim's different. Even Rabbi Akiva acknowledges that as it relates to Kachim, for sure, without a question, there was a halacha of shchita. When Rabbi Akiva says that there was a heted to eat basar nechira, what he means is basar chulin. Basar chulin was mutter b'nechira, but avada basar kachim, that required shchita. That's psukim and teres kayanim. That's not negotiable. Not the kasha. Bishlam the Rabbi Shmuel. Bishlam according to Rabbi Shmuel. Hainu dechsev. That's pshat in the pasuk that says Hatzoin ubakar yishachet lahem. This is in the context of the slav, but the pasuk over there says the tzoin and the bakar are going to require a shchita. El Rabbi Akiva, my Hatzoin ubakar yishachet lahem yinachel lahem yibayilei. Why does it say shchita? It doesn't require shchita, right? Yinacher would be enough. You can't eat the tzoin ubakar live because it would be evim and achai, but you don't need shchita, and the chir would be okay. And here we're dealing with the slav. That was chulin, that wasn't kachim. So you see, mafurish, there was something called shchita chulin in the midbar. Isn't this a kasha? Rabbi Akiva. So the Gemara says, I hear the diak, but nechira shalahem zuhi shchitasan. When it says yishachit over there, doesn't mean shchita as in the Masechtas Chulin's definition of shchita. It means whatever was required. If nechira was enough, then zol is main in nechira. But don't get so caught up with that diak, because enochinami, when it came to basar chulin, there was no halacha in the midbar of it requiring shchita. Another kash. Bishlam is Rabbi Shmuel. Bishlam according to Rabbi Shmuel. Hainu d'tanan. I understand the following Mishnah. This is a Mishnah towards the end of the Masechta and Apehei Amaraf. The Mishnah over there is discussing the laws of Kisui Hadam. So we know that certain animals, if you shech them, the dam spills on the floor, but you have to do Kisui Hadam. You have to cover the blood. So the Mishnah over there says, if somebody was doing shchita, and then the animal became in a veil while you were doing the shchita, or v'hanoicher, v'hama'aker. Ma'aker is if somebody just rips the simonim out of the animal. Patim elechasais. In these cases, you're not mechuyev to do kisei hadam. So the Gemara says, according to Rabbi Yishmael, I understand why this halacha would have always been the case. Where unless you did shchita, there's no mitzvah of kisei hadam. If you do shchita, so you prepared this animal in a proper way. You prepared it in a proper way, there's a mitzvah of kisei hadam. If you didn't do shchita, or you did nechira, you did ikor, whatever it is you might have done. In those situations, you didn't do it the way you're supposed to do it. As a result, there's not going to be a halacha of kisam. El Rabbi Akiva, but according to Rabbi Akiva, amai patim elachasais. Why would you be patim elachasais? Midi patim elachasais sounds like that there is no mitzvah of kisui hadam. There never was a mitzvah of kisui hadam. L'chayra, the kasha is when the yidden were in the midbar, there was no mitzvah of shchita. Then you were allowed to do nechira. And there was no maila even of doing a shchita. So if that's the case, there should have been a mitzvah of kisei adam for nechira or ikur, just like there was a mitzvah of kisei adam as it relates to the shchita. And if that's the case, then when the yidden, when the midbar, for sure the mitzvah of kisei adam would have been true whether they did shchita or they didn't do shchita. And if that's the case, it should be the same way now. Meaning once when the yidden were in the midbar, if there was no advantage, there was no benefit of doing shchita because basar nechira was mutter, well, if that's the case, for sure the mitzvah of kisei adam related, whether you did shchita, you didn't do a shchita. And if that's the case, it should be the same way now. So why is there a Mishnah that makes the chiluk? Bishlam, according to Rabbi Yishmael, there was never a het of bas and nechira. So mitchila, by Har Sinai, when the mitzvah of kisei adam was given, how was it given? If you do a shchita, there's a mitzvah of kisei adam. If you don't do a shchita, there's no mitzvah of kisei adam. But being that a little bit Rabbi Akiva, when the mitzvah initially was given, so it had nothing to do with shchita. Why? Because the 40 years that year they were in the midbar, there was no din shchita either. So for sure there was a mitzvah of kisei adam, even if you did nechira or you did ikar. So where would that have ever changed? And the Gemara says, no, hayol ve'itzer. You're right. L'chadchila, when the year were in the midbar, for sure there was a mitzvah of kisei adam, even if you did nechira and ikar. But once bas and nechira became maser, at that point you had to do shchita. Then it makes sense that the only time there should be a mitzvah of kisei adam is if you actually do the shchita, and that's where it became nageya, this halacha, that if you would do nechira or ikar, there wouldn't be a mitzvah of kisei adam. Either way, we had three what we thought were pretty decent rayas to Shitas Rabbi Yishmael. The Gemara deflected all three of them. Right, the shachat has ben abakar. You see shchita in the midbar. True, but by kachim shiny. What about that lashon by the Slav where it says Atzayin ubakar yishachet lahem? Shchita doesn't mean shchita. Right? Nechira shalahem zui shchitasan. Isn't there a raya from Kisi Adam? Nope, there is no raya. Okay, now the Gemara is going to reverse it. Bishlam, the Rabbi Akiva, Bishlam, according to Rabbi Akiva, the Amar Basa Taiva Yitzakal, who holds that there was never an Issa Basa Taiva when the Midbar Hainu Dechsiv. I understand the pasuk that says, Ach kashe ye achel esat tzvi ve'esa ayol kein tachlenu. Right? That's one of the psukim that are mentioned over there in that parsha. It's actually the third of the 9 psukim. Ach kashe ye achel esat tzvi ve'esa ayol kein tachlenu hatami v'atar yachtov yaklenu. And essentially what the pasuk is saying is that just like now, you're allowed to eat the tzvi and the ayil in a state of tumah. Why? Because it's not something that goes on the mizbeach. So too, when you're going to shecht chulin, an animal that theoretically could go on the mizbeach, but being that it's chulin, you'll be able to eat it even in a state of tumah. So the Gemara says, 1 second, it sounds mefurish in the pasuk that if the yid wanted to eat the tzvi or the ayil, he was able to eat it, right? It's mefurish. Kasha yochel asat tzvi ve'asa ayil kein tachlenu. And again, let's be clear. The tzvi and the ayil don't go on the mizbeach. That means if they're being eaten chulin. The pasuk says mefurish, you could eat it in a state of tumah. It's clearly being eaten chulin. So bishlam, according to Rabbi Akiva, you were allowed to eat basa taiva. I understand that the pasuk says kasha yochel asat tzvi ve'asa ayil. El Rabbi Shmuel, according to Rabbi Shmuel, tziva ayil gufa mehavi shari. I thought you weren't allowed to eat basa taiva. So the Gemara gives a huge qualification here in the world of Rabbi Shmuel. Ki asar achmana behema the chazi lakrava. Even though it's true, Rabbi Shmuel holds that you weren't allowed to eat basa taiva in the midbar, but it was only an animal that was able to go on the mizbech. Aval chayot lo chazi lakrava. But the tzvi and the ayil of that pasuk that are not able to go on the mizbech, le asar achmana, over there was no Isser. So it's true Rabbi Yishmael holds Basa Taiva was Asr, but Basa Taiva that's able to go on the Mizbech. If I could put this on the Mizbech, then I'm not allowed to eat it. But the Tzvi and the Ayil wasn't allowed to go on the Mizbech anyways, and as a result, it wasn't included in this halacha. So if you do the brief recap of the Gemara Shakla V'Tayim Rishon Rabbi Akiva, what emerges is a very important caveat in the world of Rabbi Yishmael and a very important caveat in the world of Rabbi Akiva. Let's do Rabbi Akiva first, because the Gemara did Rabbi Akiva first. Rabbi Akiva holds that when the Yid were in the Midbar for 40 years, they were allowed to eat basar nechira. The laws of Shchitas Chulin were neschadish when the Yidden entered Eretz Yisrael in Vayikra Perek Yud Beis, Pasuk Chaf through Chaf Ches. Stating that, the Gemara says, Kachim Shaini. That was only true as it relates to Chulin. But as it relates to Kachim, for sure, V'shachat as ben Abakar, Shchita, which is such a big part of Masechtas Zvachim, that applied even during the 40 years that the Yidden were in the Midbar. As it relates to Rabbi Yishmael, who said a Chiddush, that for the 40 years that the Yidden were in the Midbar, they were not allowed to eat Basar Taiva, huge caveat. And that was only true as it relates to basar that was roy to go on the mizbech. So if you have an animal that you could bring on the mizbech, shoy, or kesef, or eis, right? The 3 animals that go on the mizbech, male, female, any one of those animals that can go on the mizbeach, there was a halacha. If you wanted to eat it basa taivadik, it was not something that you were allowed to do. But as it relates to the tzvi and the ayil that were not able to go on the mizbeach, any animal that cannot go on the mizbeach, assuming it's kosher, so that you were very much allowed to eat. Zok the Gemara. Boy Rabbi Yirmiyah. And in the world of Boy Rabbi Yirmiyah, this is a classic. A varim basin nechira. If someone had a varim of basin nechira, shechnisu Yisrael imam la'aretz, and then the Yid, he packed a little lunch. What's today's itinerary? Well, we're crossing the Yarden. We're going to enter Eretz Yisrael. You want to just bring food, you can never be certain enough. So a Yid goes and he took some basa nechir. This is in Rabbi Akiva's world. They were allowed to eat basa nechir during the 40 years that the Yidden were in the Midbar. And he has his little lunch bag. And now he enters the land. Is he allowed to eat it or is he not allowed to eat it? This is classic Rabbi Yirmiyah. So there's a het to basa nechira when the Yidden are in the Midbar. Once he entered the land, you're not allowed to eat basa nechir. Oh, but this basa nechir became mutter already when the Yidden were in the Midbar. So in Rabbi Akiva's world, is it going to be okay or is it not going to be okay? So the Gemara took Rabbi Yirmiyah's question very seriously, as it always did. And the Gemara said, 1 second, let's break this down a little bit better. Hey, so when exactly did this take place? And by the way, these next 2 lines of Gemara is also part and parcel of why Chulin Daf Yud Zayin is such a critical daf in the world of Ray. So, we've been making a big fuss about the Machlokes Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Akiva. This is very much the topic of the day. But these few lines here that the Gemara is going to throw in B'derech Agav is a reason unto itself why this daf would have an asterisk. But either way, says the Gemara, when exactly did this happen? Shakavshu, do you mean that it's during the 7 years, the first 7 years that the Yidden entered the land, while they were being Isaac and conquering the land of Canaan? Well, Hashta, during that time, they were allowed to eat even treif. Even treif. How do you know that? Because the pasuk says the Yidden are told that you're going to enter the land. You're going to see ubatim leim kol tov. You're going to see all these good foods, and if you want to eat it, you can eat it. Rabbi Yirmiyah said in the name of the great Rav that even kasle the chazeri. Some people have the girsa not kasle with a kaf, but with a kuf. Others have the girsa kadli with a dalet the chazeri. But everybody knows that when the Yidden entered the land, while they were conquering the land, they were allowed to eat whatever they wanted to eat. They could even eat mamash achazafisel. Even that they were allowed to eat. So of course they were allowed to eat basa and chira that was mutter to them already in the midbar. So the shail of Rabbi Yirmiyah cannot be negated those first 7 years, because those first 7 years they can do whatever they want, right? Basa and chira mibaya. If they can eat the kadli the chazir, of course they can eat the basa and chira. Elo la'achamikan. Must be the shail was negated after 7 years. So again, this just adds a hoop in Rabbi Yirmiyah's imagination, and that is someone has basa and chira, he takes it with him. He's not eating lunch later that day. He's gonna put it somewhere for 7 years. I guess he's aging it, and then after 7 years, at his own risk, he's going to eat it, and that would be the shayla. Or you could say, no, Rabbi Yirmiyah didn't mean that. Rabbi Yirmiyah meant where the person's not going to eat it during the 7 shakavshu. Rather, what's the kasha? The kasha is, shevet shakavshu, they're allowed to eat kadli the chaziri, kal v'chaymer, they're allowed to eat basa nechira. Says the Gemara, no, because ki ishter lahu, shalosh alev dekei chavim. The heter batim leim kol tov meant that if you're going to go into a house and you're going to see a stuffed pantry, or there's going to be something on the grill, and you're hungry, you could take it off the grill, you could pull it out of the pantry, and you want to eat it, you could eat it. But that doesn't mean that the laws of kashrus are null and void during that kufa, right? Their own food is not going to be okay. So if you have your own non-kosher food, you bought it in the midbar or whatever it is, of course you're not going to be able to eat it. The whole heter of Kali the Chaziri is not a heter in the Gavra, I can do whatever I want. It's a heter in the Chefza that there's shalol. If I want to eat, that's something that I'm going to be able to do. But as it relates to my own, that already not. Either way, Rabbi Yirmiyah's Ibaya was one of two things. Either Rabbi Yirmiyah's Ibaya was Negeya during not the Shevesh HaKavshu, but the time after that, or no, it's even Negeya the Shevesh HaKavshu, because at the end of the day, it could be the heter is only Negeya, the shalol of the guy. But as it relates to any thing that he has, Avada would be mutter. Hence, Rabbi Yirmiyah, right? I want to know. This is my shayla. If somebody entered the land with basa and chira, in the world of Rabbi Akiva, the basa and chira was mutter during the 40 years that he did in the midbar, and now he's already in the land. Would it be mutter or would it not be mutter? And the Gemara says, Teiku. Zok the Gemara weiter. Amar Rab. So Rabba said, Shanisa, you explained Hakol Sheichten, Ula Oilam Sheichten. Hakol Sheichten, we said, means everything requires Shechita, even an oif. La'olam Sheichten, that's a machlokes Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef, where the La'olam Sheichten, in the world of Rabbi Yishmael, that even after the Yidden went into Golos, Sheichten va'oichlin basa taiva, Yosef learned it in the world of Rabbi Akiva, that even after the Yidden went into Golos, you have to do Shechita, and we're not going to reinstate the heter of Bas and Echir. But either way, we explained HaKoil Sheichten, and we explained La'olam Sheichten. Ba'Koil Sheichten, my matchness lay. The Mishnah also said Ba'Koil Sheichten. What exactly is that coming to explain? V'chi Tamer Rabbi said, maybe what it's coming to say is that you could shecht in any way that you want to shecht. Bein betzor, with a stone, bein beschuchis, with glass, bein bekroi mishal kana, with the stem of a reed. Maybe that's what it's coming to say. But says Rabbi, I don't think so. You know why? Because Hadumya Dahanach Tani. Because I think that Ba'Koil should be similar to Hakoil and La'olam. Okay. Hakoil Sheichten was referring to what? It was referring to the Nishchat. Everything requires Shechita, even an oif. La'olam Sheichten was also referring to the Nishchat, right? You can always shecht chulin. You always have to shecht chulin, right? Rabbi and Rav Yosef. But it's all on the nishchat level. If you're going to tell me that Ba'Koil Sheichten is the way you do the shechita, so it's focusing not on the nishchat, but it's focusing on the shoichet. That's a little inconsistent. Let's see it inside. Says Rabba, if you're going to tell me that's what it's coming to be marba, but isn't bakol shoichten supposed to be similar to hakol shoichten and la'olam shoichten and ihanach b'shoichten? And if those two would have been explained as being marba something in the shoichten, well, then I would understand hainami b'shoichten. I would understand why it makes sense that bakol shoichten should also be referring to the shoichten. But being that you already explained that those two are referring to the nishchatin, hainami b'nishchatin, it makes sense that bakol shoichten should also be referring to the nishchatin. So Rabbi said, I'm very uncomfortable by saying that akol shoichten, ula olam shoichten is referring to the nishchat, and bakol shoichten is referring to the shoichet. Elamar, Rava said, because of this, let me tell you, you have to learn this Mishnah completely differently. We have to revisit the hakols and the la'olams. Hakol shoichten is not coming to be marba the oif, because that's the nishchat, and we want it to be being marba the shoichet, as we're about to say. So what's it coming to be marba? Chadala suya kuti, v'chadala suya Yisrael mummer. One is coming to be marba kuti, one's coming to be marba Yisrael mummer. Now, only said hakol shoichten once. So what do you mean, one for this and one for that? So look at Rashi. No, it's the second time we had hakol shoichten. Right, look at the top of the page. What's the name of the yomid? Hakol shoichten u'shchitas g'sheira. Right, that's how the Homer Sechta began. And we made a big deal. Hakol asuye mai. Now, who's talking? Rava's talking. So Zok Rava, you remember I told you in the beginning of the Masechta that hakol's la'asuye kuti? Well, now there's a second hakol. So the first hakol was coming to be marba kuti, and the second hakol is coming to be marba Yisrael mummer. By the way, this is very gishmak, and Tosa spoke this out already in Chulin Dav Beis. And that is, if you remember, one of the 6 pshatim that we had in the Mishnah of hakol la'asuye mai was Rav Ashi. It was the 6th, right? And what did Rav Ashi say? Rav Ashi said hakol is coming la'asuye. It's coming la'asuye Yisrael mummer oichel nevelos l'teyavin. And the Gemara says, how does Rav Ashi even know that Yisrael mummer oichel nevelos l'teyavin is allowed to shech the Rava? Because Rava is the one that said it. So this is Rava l'shitasi. Rava l'shitasi, remember the whole Rav Ashi was predicated on Rava. So Rava l'shitasi, who holds that Hakol could have also been Marba or Yisrael Mummer. So he really had 2 options. Hakol could be Marba Kuti, it could be Marba Yisrael Mummer. Zok Rava Geshmak. Chada l'asuye Kuti, that's what I told you in the beginning of the parak. And Chada l'asuye Yisrael Mummer, that's what this one's going to come to be Marba. La'olam shoichten also is referring to the shoichet. And what's it coming to be married? Ben b'yoyim, ben b'layla, ben b'rosh hagang, ben b'rosh hasfina. So lo'iva means doesn't matter when, b'yoyim u'b'layla, also doesn't matter where. You could do it on the top of a roof, or you could do it on the top of a sfina, and obviously you could do it in a more normal place. But the bottom line is lo'ilam, you could always do it. Ba'akol shoichten. Now that I told you that hakol and lo'ilam are both talking about what? The shoichet. So now ba'akol shoichten, you could say the way Rabbi said it. Ben b'tzur, ben b'schuches, ben b'kroy mishel. The bottom line is that we have 2 mahalchim how to understand the Mishnah that says hakol shoichten, ula oilam shoichten, and bakol shoichten. As it relates to hakol shoichten, what are the 2 mahalchim? The first mahalach of the Gemara was it's coming to be marba afilu oif, emphasis on the nishchat. The second mahalach, which is Rava, it's coming to be marba Yisrael mumma oichel nevelos l'teyavain, that he is allowed to shecht. When it says ula oilam sheichten, we have now 3 pshatim. We have Rabba, it's Rabbi Yishmael. We have Rabbi Yosef, it's Rabbi Akiva, and we have Rava, that it's coming to tell me bein bayoim, bein balayla, bein berosh hagag, and bein berosh hasfina. As it relates to bakol sheichten, we had 1 pshat. We had 1 pshat, and that is bein betzur, bein beschuches, bein bekroim mishal kan. Either way, there's a lot to get to as it relates to everything that we learned up until this point, but we have to at least turn the page. So we'll make a haschala on the next part of the sugya, and then Be'ez Hashem tomorrow we'll pick up where we left off. So the Mishnah, going back, said, Hakoil shoichten, ula oilam shoichten, ubakoil shoichten, chutz, with the exception of a magal kotzer, v'hamegera, v'ashinayim, v'atzipoirim, mipnei shehin choinken. So, as much as, it sounds like your last shecht, who, what, when, where, hakol, bakol, mikol, but at the same time, that's actually not true. You're not allowed to use the magal kotzer, you're not allowed to use the harvest sickle, you're not allowed to use a magera, which literally means a saw. Shinayim, you can't use your teeth, Tziparim, you can't use your nail, and the reason is because all these things are chinik. What they do is, they don't sever the simanim of the animal, but rather they choke the animal somehow. So, shechita has to be done in a very precise way. The 5 halachis l'Moshe Sinai. These methods are inevitably not going to be able to conform with the way a shechita has to be done, and it's for that reason this is going to be an issue. Says the Gemara, Avua de Shmuel, Pagam v'shadar, Pagam v'shadar. Avua de Shmuel knew that the halacha is that when you use a sakin to shecht, you have to make sure that there are no pgimos, there are no notches inside the sakin. We'll see more about these notches in a minute. But he wasn't sure exactly what a pgam that would disqualify a knife would look like. So pagam v'shada. So he was experimenting. He took knives, he made these pgimis inside of them, and he would send them to the chevra, to people that knew, to try to get a sense of what works and what doesn't work. Finally, they sent him back. He's sending us all these knives. Stop sending me your knives. This is the rule you need to know. That if it has a notch that makes it look like a saw, that's when it's going to be a problem. But if not, then already it's not going to be a problem. So you don't have to send us everything. Just use this rule of thumb. Now here's the question. What exactly does Kim Megera even mean? So Rashi says that it means something like this, that if you have a knife and the knife has a notch inside of it, Rashi describes it as a V-shaped notch, and on the top of the V's, where the knife is, where the blade is, you have like a little spitz that's pointing out. That's what the issue is. The issue is that spitz, as you're going through the kana and the veshed, is going to get into the kana and the veshed. It's going to tear a little hole inside of it. That's not the way a shechita has to happen. And by the way, one of two things can be an issue here. Number one, if the animal gets killed that way, so then it wasn't a shechita, it was an avela, and even if you end up really slaughtering the animal in the proper way, but it would render it a treifa potentially. But the bottom line is that little nick that all of a sudden is going to come about in the kana, the veshed, because of that spitz, that's what we're worried about. So in the event that the pgam is shaped like the megera, then you end up with those little spitzes, those little pointy things sticking out. That getting into the kana, the veshed, is the troublemaker. That's when you're going to have a problem. Talk to Gemara. On this note, Tanu Rabban and a Braisa. Sakin sheish b'pkimas harbe, a sakin that has many pkimos. Tidan kimigera. That's like a saw. That's something that's for sure an issue. So you have a sakin that has multiple pkimos, then on arrival. There's no way in the world you're able to use the sakin. In the event that you have a sakin, and the sakin has only one pkima, so there's this one notch, that one V shape inside the knife, oigeres psula. In the event that this pgam is oigeres, it's going to be a problem. Misuchseches, ksher, it's going to be kosher. So what's the question? What exactly does oigeres and misuchseches mean? Good question. Heichidami oigeres, heichidami misuchseches. Says the Gemara. Rabbi Lazar said, oigeres mishtei ruchos. Oigeres means that because of this V, because of this notch that you have inside the knife, so now all of a sudden you have these two pointy spitzes, can't think of a better word, on the two sides. And because you have these two little things that are sticking out, that's when it's an issue. Misuchseches, however, is miruach achas. When you only have that sticking out on one side, then already it's not going to be an issue. So if it's a geres, you have two of these little spitzes, that's a problem. That's what the Mishnah says. Psula. If it's misuchseches, it's only on one side, then it's going to be ksheira. Says the Gemara. I don't understand the difference between having two of these spitzes or only one. What's the reason if you have two of them? So probably the reason is as follows. Because the mursha kama, the first one of these things that are sticking out, machlish, is going to weaken, it's going to go through the skin into the area of the kana, the veshed, umursha bas rabasa, and the second one's going to go ahead and is going to tear it. Meaning the Gemara assumes that probably the reason you would have to have two is because if there was only one of those nicks, then what's going to happen is it's that one is going to have to tear through the skin. So by the time you get to the actual kana and the veshed, it's the blade of the knife that ultimately is going to do the shechita. It's not going to happen through this mursha. It's not going to happen through that pointy thing. So if you have two of them, one of them is going to tear through, and the second one is going to be buzza. It's going to tear the actual kana and the veshed. But if you have one, then you don't have to worry about it, because that one is going to tear through the animal, which then by the time you get to the kan and the veshet, the knife is going to be taking over. But the Gemara says, I don't understand that, because even if you only have miruach achas, let's say you have one of them, why are you not concerned that churfa de sakina machlish mursha baza? Maybe it's the knife that's going to be machlish and the mursha is going to be baza. How do you know that it's the mursha that's going to be machlish and it's the churfa de sakina that's going to be baza? Maybe it's going to actually happen in the reverse. So the Gemara says, you're right. The only time misuch seches is ksher, the only time it's kosher is if you have only one of these murshas, is the koim aresha de sakina. It's only if you have it at the top. So if you have it at the top, so you know for sure that its job here, what it's going to ultimately do is it's going to cut through the skin, but by the time you get to the kan and the veshet, then the knife is already going to take over, and as a result, the knife cuts it, then it's going to be fine. But the Gemara says, soif ki ozla machlasha, ki asa baza. Why are you not worried that it's true? On the way in, right, whenever you do a shchita, you have to be moilech umevi. So on the way in, because it's on the top, so enochanami, the knife is ultimately going to get the kan and the veshet. But you always still have to be mevi. And by the time you're going to be mevi, why are you not worried over there it's going to nail it? So the Gemara says, the only time Misuch is going to be kosher is in the event that you were a hoylech v'lo heavy. Now, how could you be a hoylech v'lo heavy? I thought you always have to be moilech umevi. So Rashi says, no, if you have a sakin arucha, you don't have to be moilech umevi, and that's where this is going to be negay. So here's the bottom line. Super technical, but this is what it is. In the event that you have a knife that has multiple p'gimos. Multiple p'gimos dead on arrival. That's a megir. The only time we're even having a conversation that a knife that has a p'gam maybe should be kosher is if there's one p'gam, meaning one notch. Even then, if you end up with two murshas, two of these pointy pieces sticking out, the tops of these V's, what the Bryce refers to as it's oigeres, it's going to be an issue. Because we're worried one is going to cut through and the other one is going to ultimately be buzza into the actual kana and the veshet. If there's one, it could be mutter. But even then, you have to read the not such fine print. Number one, it has to be on the top of the knife, because if it's not on the top of the knife, then we're afraid the knife is going to cut through, and then it's going to get the kana and the veshet. Additionally, you have to be using a sakin arucha, because if you're not using a sakin arucha, you're going to have to be melech maybe. So even if it's on the top of the knife, on the way back, you're going to get it. So it's always a problem, unless there's one pgam, and there's only one spitz. It's misuch seches, it's on the top of the knife, and it's as a certain knife that you don't have to be moilech umevi. Omar Rava said, Gimel midas besakin. There are three midas when it comes to knives. Oigeres, in the event it's oigeres, meaning you have this one notch, and the notch is oigeres, which means you have these two corners, these two murshas. Lo yishcha yinal l'shech v'mshach ad shechita tzoi psula. Misuch seches, if it's misuch seches, which means you only have one pointy corner. By the way, what happened to the other corner? So either you just scraped it down, so like this it's not pointy anymore, or maybe it was just shaped in a way that for whatever reason it wasn't there. But the bottom line is, if it's misuch seches, you're not allowed to shech lechatchila, but ve'im shachet, if you did shech kasek sheh, but the evidence is going to be kosher. Oile v'yoyred, what would be if it was oile v'yoyred? So oile v'yoyred, Rashi explains, over here means, this is not the same oil of shchitas kachim, right? In shchitas chula, what it means is that there was an area that had a lot of issues on it. It had these pekimois, but you shaved it down. The reason it's oil of is because the area that you shave down loses some of its metal, loses some of its matter. So it's bigger or wider on some sides and it's narrower on other sides, but the bottom line is, in a situation where it's oila v'yored, then sheicha b'lechatchila, if you want to shech lechatchila, that in of itself is going to be okay. So what are the gimel midas besakin? Oigeres lo yishchayt, but the evidence a problem. Misuch seches lo yishchayt lechatchila, but the evidence kasha. Oila v'yored, you can shech lechatchila. Those are the gimel midas, right? Three different halachas. Oh, Rav Huna Rav Nechem the Rav Ashi. Rav Huna Rav Nechem told Rav Ashi, Amar la mashmei de Rava, you told us in the name of Rava misuch seches psula. I'm pretty sure I heard you say that Rava is of the opinion misuch seches psula. V'amar Rava, Rava just said gimel midas besakin, and he said misuch seches kshera. So it's a stira in Rava. Now, if the Gemara wanted, the Gemara could have asked another kasha. The Gemara could have said, it doesn't stem with the Brisa, because we had the Brisa on the top of the Yomid, right? It was a Brisa, the last words of Yudzayin Amar Aleph for Tanu Rabbanan. And then it said, Sakin sheish b'pkimas harbi tidin kimegera, v'she'im b'yal b'kima achas, oigeres psula, misuch seches is kshera. So Rav Ashi said in the name of Rava, misuch seches psula, the Brisa says kshera. So the Gemara could have asked Rava l'shitasai, the Gemara could have asked, it doesn't stem with the Brisa, the Gemara preferred to ask Rava l'shitasai. But either way, the Gemara says like kasha, kasha. It's not a kasha. Why? Kansha hoilech vehevi. Kansha hoilech v'loy hevi. When is misuchseches kasha? We said you have to meet all these criteria. It has to be on the top of the knife, and also it has to be a situation when you're not moilech umevi. Because if you're going to be moilech umevi, then even if it's on the top of the knife, on the way back, you always have to be worried. So it's true, there are times Mesuchseches is kasha, but it's only where you conform, you check off all the boxes that we mentioned earlier. It's true, it's one pgam, it's Mesuchseches, it's on the top of the knife, and you were moilech v'lo heavy. But if you were moilech v'heavy, then already it's going to be puzzle, and that's what Rav Ashi said. I meant when I said in the name of Rava that it's psula b'di'evet. He was talking about a situation where you were moilech v'heavy. One last gemara. Amali Rav Acha Brei Rav Avya Rav Ashi. Damya l'sasa mai. What would be if you have a knife, but this knife is very rough? Right, rough around the edges, literally. So it doesn't have literally these pointy things protruding out of it. It doesn't have pkimois, but it's damya le sasa. Rashi says zokon hashibolim she'inei chalak. So the beard of a stalk of wheat, right? So that like furry, fuzzy feeling. That's what the knife feels like. Is it going to be okay? Amalez Rav Ashi responded to him quite dramatically. He told him, not only is it okay, man yavla mi bisrei v'achlinan halavai. Somebody would give me some of its meat. I'd eat it right now. But there's no question in the world that would be okay. Either way, we're going to stop our daf right here. So as it relates to raid, going back to the overwhelming majority of today's daf, which was the machlokes between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva, which we mentioned in the introduction, really revolves around 9 psukim tucked away in Parshas Re'eh, in Perek Yud Beis, starting from Pasuk Chaf, going through Pasuk Chaf Ches, where the Pasuk seems to suggest that there was some before or after. There was some relationship that the Yidden had with meat during the 40 years that they were in the Midbar that was going to change dramatically once the Yidden entered Eretz Yisrael. According to Rabbi Yishmael, the relationship was when the Yidden were in the Midbar, they were not allowed to eat basa taifa. When the Yidden entered Eretz Yisrael, then they were allowed to eat basa taifa. The Gemara qualified that Rabbi Yishmael holds that when the Yidden in the Midbar, they were not allowed to eat basa taifa, it means something that was roy lakrov, something that could have been put on the mizbech. But something that couldn't be put on the mizbech, such as the tzvi and the ayil, that's something that if they wanted in the Midbar, they would have been allowed to eat in the Midbar. Rabbi Akiva held that the unique relationship that the Yidden had with meat in the Midbar was that if they wanted to eat meat, they could eat meat, not like Rabbi Yishmael, but they were allowed to eat even basa nechira. They didn't have to do shchita. When the Yidden entered Eretz Yisrael, that's when it was neschadish the laws of shchita. The Gemara qualified it with a very critical caveat, and that was only true with regards to basa chulin. But as it relates to basa kachim shiny, the immortal words, and over there avada there was a halacha of shchita. But here's the point: we have a parish in the Torah, 9 psukim, that seems to be describing something extremely fundamental as it relates to the relationship the Jews had with meat during the 40 years they were in the Midbar, and Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva had 2 completely different ways of seeing it. And what emerges is in the world of Rabbi Yishmael, there was an Isser Basa Taiva in the Midbar, and in the world of Rabbi Akiva, there was a Heter Basa Nechira during the 40 years that the Yidden were in the Midbar. Said a little bit differently, when the Yidden entered Eretz Yisrael in the world of Rabbi Yishmael, they got this incredible gift, this kula, that from this point forward, there will no longer be an Isser Basa Taiva. According to Rabbi Akiva, when the Yidden entered Eretz Yisrael, they got this chumrah. They were told, from this point forward, there's no longer going to be a heter to eat basa nechira, but rather, from this point forward, you're going to have to do shchita. So we mentioned, little cliffhanger, that really the machlokes Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Akiva affects another parish in the Torah, in the Pshutei Shel Mikra, exactly how you're supposed to understand it. And by the way, just as a disclaimer, as it relates to this raid bite, the objective over here is not to say anything fancy at all. The objective is to just lay out this inyan a little bit so that Be'ezer Hashem, we have the foundation of this machlokes Rabbi Akiva, and it'll give us something to build off of in the next few days. But again, today's the day to try our best to have an understanding and internalize this very, very important machlokes. Regards. So, what's this other parish in the Torah? It's in Parshas Achri Mos, It's Revi. It's Perik Yud Zayin Pasuk Al. The Pasuk says, "Vayidaber Havaya El Moshe Lemar, Daber El Aharon ve'El Banov ve'El Kol Bnei Yisrael ve'Amarto Aleim. Zeh Hadavar Asher Tziva Hashem Lemar. Ish mi Beis Yisrael. Any Yid Asher Yishchat Shor or Kesef or Eis B'Machane, who's going to decide to shecht a Shor, a Kesef, or an Eis B'Machane, meaning anywhere in the Machane, or Asher Yishchat Michutz LaMachane, or better yet, he's going to decide to shecht outside of the Machane. But he chose not to take this animal and bring it as a carbon to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. L'fnei Mishkan Hashem. Dom yechoshev le'ishahu. Dom shafach. V'nichras le'ishu mikerev amai. This person's chayiv kares. You know why? Because this yid has to know it's not okay to just go ahead and bring animals al pnei asada. Rather, he has to bring it to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He has to bring it to the Pesach HaDayom. You know what you're supposed to do with it? You're supposed to bring it as a carbon shlom. And the kohen is supposed to take from the blood, and he's supposed to do a zrika. And he's supposed to be makted the chalavim as a reich nechayach. And by doing this, you'll be protected. Like this, you'll be distanced. You'll be removed from avodah zarah. Make sure you observe this halacha forever. This parish that we just read is what's known in the Kachim yeshivas as the parish of Shchutei Chutz. Right? This is the parasha that says that if somebody shechts b'chutz, he's chayiv kares. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi says, "B'muktoshem akasem medaber." This pasuk is talking about if somebody goes ahead and he shechts kachim, and he shechts it b'machane, or he shechts it michutz lamachane. The halach is he's chayiv kares, and there's a whole parak in kachim. The 13th parak in Masechtas Zvachim, parak Ashoichet V'Mayla, and really the 14th parak Paras Chatos, is a continuation of it that deals with these halachas. The halachas of Shchutei Chutz. And by the way, if you go weiter over here in Parak Yud Zayin, the next pasuk says, "V'aleim toimar ish mi beis Yisrael menager asher yagu b'soichem asher yalo oilo izavach v'pesach oimoy lo yevienu las oisav nichos oishup kermam." And that pasuk is talking about if somebody takes the emurim, he takes the chalavim of a carbon and he's maila them, not in the mizbeach, but rather b'machra michutz lamachra. That person is also going to be chayiv kares. The first half of the parasha is what's known as the parasha of Shchutei Chutz, Parak Hashoichet, and the second is Halas Chutz. But the bottom line is, this is the way every single person that ever learned kachim in his life understood these psukim. Stating that, think about this pasuk for a minute. Did the pasuk say a word about kachim? Did it say one word about kachim? Ish mi beis Yisrael asher yishchat shor oy kesef oy eis b'machane oy asher yishchat michutz lamachane. Didn't say a word about kachim. And he just didn't bring it as a carbon. Now Rashi says, Rashi said, did the pasuk say the word kachim? The pasuk didn't say one word about kachim. Zokter Ramban in Parshas Achrimos in his Pirush Al HaTeira, that I believe that Aliba de Rabbi Yishmael that holds that there was an issa to eat basa taiva when the Yidden were in the midbar. This parsha over here of Shchutei Chutz is not like Rashi says, Ben Muktashim Akasam Medaber. I think this pasuk is talking about Chulin as well. And what the pasuk is saying is a Yid is not allowed to eat Chulin when he's going to be in the midbar. So that Shoyrei Kesef is that a Yid is going to go ahead and he's going to shecht Vel Pesach Oyamoyed Lo Yevi La'agiv Karban L'Hashem. It's true for Kachim, Avad is true for Kachim, but it's true for Chulin as well. Because if a Yid is going to go ahead and he's going to shecht Chulin, essentially what is he doing? He's eating basa taiva. And for a Yid to go ahead and to eat basa taiva, that was also for the 40 years that the Yid were in the midbar. And Zokter Rambam, I'm just reading the pasuk, it doesn't say a word about Ben Muktashim. And I believe that the way Rabbi Yishmael would be mefarish this pasuk, the way Rabbi Yishmael would be mefarish this pasuk is that this pasuk is talking afilu bechulin. In fact, the Ramban says that to me in the Pshutei Shal Mikra, v'hano'us b'kosav al derech hapshat. I just read the pshat of the pasuk. I'm learning Pshutei Shal Mikra. I'm being mefarish the psukim right now. That's my objective and my commentary on the Torah. And I think it's pashut that in the Pshutei Shel Mikra, there's no mention of the word b'muktashim hakasim adaber. Dr. Ramban, why did Rashi say b'muktashim hakasim adaber? Oh, I know why Rashi said it. Rashi probably said b'muktashim hakasim adaber because Rashi wanted to be mafarish the psukim alibid Rabbi Akiva. And according to Rabbi Akiva, for sure there was no iser of basa taiva when the yid were in the mid, but even basa nechir, everything was mutter. So for sure this would not have been an issue. Oh, must be b'muktashim hakasim adaber perek hashayit v'mayla in mesechtes vachim. Oh, but Dr. Ramban alibid Rabbi Shmuel, I don't think that's the way it is. And then the Ramban goes on, and the Ramban says that I've looked at all the psukim in the Torah, Sai, Parshas Re'eh, Vayikra, Perek Yudez, and the Pshutei Shel Mikra of these psukim, and his loshen is Derech Yishav HaMikrois, Al Oifaneim, V'derech HaChomim Ba'agodos, U'Beroi VaMekoimois, is Kamoisha Pirashnu Al Libid Rabbi Shmuel, and that's why I prefer being Mefarish this Al Libid Rabbi Shmuel. I prefer not being Mefarish Al Libid Rabbi Kiva. In other words, Rashi, who learns B'Muktoshan HaKasim Medaber, L'chura Dr. Ramban was going aliba de Rabbi Akiva. But I think that in the world of Rabbi Yishmael, the way you would learn the parasha of Shchutei Chutz is not b'muktashim hakasim adaber, but rather it's talking even about Shchitas Chulin. What emerges then is this parasha of Shchutei Chutz, which comes up over and over and over again, especially when you're learning Seder Kachim. We have a tremendous machloikis. Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Akiva had to understand Pashup Pshat in the parasha. According to Rabbi Yishmael, that holds there was an Isser Basa Taiva when the Yidden were in the Midbar. Well, then what would emerge is that this Isser was not only Negeya, Muktashim, but it was Negeya Chulin as well. According to Rabbi Akiva, there was a heter to eat basa taiva, so what's the problem if you're going to go ahead, you're going to shecht chulin? Oh, the issue must be memuktashim akasam medaber. Now, if you think about it, in Rabbi Shmuel's world, it's an unbelievable chiddush way the Ramban's learning, because what emerges is that this halacha of there being an isser to eat basa taiva in the midbar, it manifested itself in such a chomer de ga'ofen that not only was the yin not allowed to eat basa taiva, but if he would shecht basa chulin bachutz, just to shchit, shecht basa chulin bachutz, he would already be chayv kares. That's a chiddush al gabi chiddush, as I state in Rambam. But the bottom line is that what we have here is another parsha in the Torah that has a tremendous nafkamina in terms of this machlokes. Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Akiva exactly how to learn this parasha. According to Rabbi Akiva, b'muktashim hakasim medaber, according to Rabbi Shmuel, it would be true for Chulin as well. By the way, if you take a look at Tosfos, right here in Chulin Daf Tezayin Amud Beis, and if you take a look at Rashi, Dibra Maschol Nesel Lehem Basa Taiva, it's the bottom Tosfos on the Amud, and it's Rashi, Dibra Maschol Nesel Lehem Basa Taiva. Rashi and Tosfos already allude to this machlokes Rashi and Ramban. If you want to make the cheshbon ayin sham, but very much allude to this machlokes Rashi and Ramban that we have in the Pirush al HaTorah, that this machlokes Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva is not only negeya how you learn Devarim Perek Yud Beis, but it's also negeya how you learn Vayikra. It's also negeya how you learn Vayikra Perek Yud Zayin. So again, two parashiyos in the Torah that emerges as being subject to this machlokes between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. But the emes is, there's another derech over here in this machlokes, and I think it's critical to speak out, and that is the shita of the Rambam in his Yad Chazaka. And this is in Hilchos Shchita. It's Perek Daled. It's Halacha Yud Zayin, and it's Halacha Yud Ches. I just want to read a little bit of L'Shoinei Azov Shal Rambam. The Rambam says as follows: Kshay Yisrael b'Midbar, when the Yidden were in the Midbar, lo nitztavu b'shchitas hachulin. They were not commanded shchitas chulin. Elo hayu noichrim oy sheichtim va'oichlin kishar hagayim. They could do nechira, or they could shecht, and they were able to eat. The Rambam says, let's be honest, kishar hagayim, as I be a shaygit. If that's something that they wanted to do, that was something that they were allowed to do. Now, let's just pause for 1 second. Who is the Rambam clearly being machriya like in the machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel? This is Rabbi Akiva. That there was a het to bas and a chir when they did it, but you have to be very careful there. Says the Rambam right there, v'nitztavu b'midbar. The Yidden, stating that, were commanded in the Midbar, that if anybody wants to shecht, lo yishchait elo shlamim. He should only shecht the shlamim. Shenemar, the pasuk says, ish mi beis Yisrael v'goymer, v'al pesach hayom moyed v'goymer, l'man asher yaviu v'goymer, v'zovchu zivchei shlamim la'Hashem oisam. But they were commanded, says the Rambam, that if somebody wanted to shecht, you have to shech the shlomim, you have to shlech dafkin da azara. But if you wanted to not shecht, all you wanted to do was nechira, v'lecha b'midbar yunaycha v'oichel, this is something that you were allowed to do. You hear what's going on in the Rambam? The Rambam is learning like Rabbi Akiva, not like Rabbi Yishmael. The Rambam is learning that there was a het to bas and a chir when they were doing the midbar. But the Rambam of Furish is learning the parish of Shchutei Chutz, not like the Rambams in Psuli HaMikdashim and all those Rambams in the Kachim, the Galachas. This is Cheshchita. This is in the Kedusha volume, as we spoke about in the introduction to the Masechta. This is not in the Avodah volume of the Rambams. Over here, the Rambam says that you want to know what this pasuk is talking about. It's talking about Basa Taiva. That's what's going on over here. But in Rabbi Akiva's world, why would there be a halach of shchutei chutz for basa taiva? Zok the Rambam, I'm going to tell you why. Because even though they were allowed to eat basa nechira, but at the same time, if you wanted a shecht, you had a shecht dafka in the Beis HaMikdash. That was something, Zok the Rambam, you had to do. The Ramban said this shtickle Torah, but he said it in Rabbi Yishma. So came on nicht eingefallen in the Cholm from the Ramban to say that in Rabbi Akiva's world, where you could eat Basa Shchuta, Basa Nechira, there should be an Issa Shchutei Chutz on Chulin, with a Chi of Karis no less. The Ramban says in Pshutei Shal Mikra, who knows B'chol Apshatim. I think the Pshutei Shal Mikra for sure is telling me there's an Issa Shchutei Chutz even for Chulin. Muzayin, it's Rabbi Yishmael, who also says an Issa Basa Taiva. Not only can I eat the Basa Taiva, I can't even shecht it, and if I shecht it, I'm even going to be chayiv kars. Oh, but the Rambam learned like Rabbi Akiva. Halach, Rabbi Akiva mechaveira, like the Nois Kelim say. The Rambam learned like Rabbi Akiva, and Afilu Hachi, he learned the Pshutei Shal Mikra in the Psukim and Parshas Achri Moistoi, and the Ramban said, I prefer to learn the Pshutei Shal Mikra. He was mafarish it in the identical way. But he did it even Rabbi Akiva's world. The Ramban couldn't be masig, we're in Rabbi Akiva's world, would it be manifest this Pshutei Shal Mikra? Rambam says, what do you mean? It's very simple. If you want to eat Basa Nechira, you can eat Basa Nechira. You want to eat Basa Shchuta, you can eat Basa Shchuta. But here's the rule. This is what you got to know. If you want to eat Basa Shchuta, make sure you eat it in the Beis HaMikdash. Bring it as a shlomim, and then and only then are you going to be able to go ahead and eat it in that way. But here's the point. The Rambam is being mefarish the Pshutei Shal Mikra in the same exact way that the Ramban is, with one huge caveat. And the huge caveat is that the Ramban only heard that pshat in Rabbi Yishmael's world. The Rambam was able to entertain this pshat even in Rabbi Akiva's world. Meaning, Vayikra Perek Yud Beis, for sure how you learn the parsha is the Machlokes Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. What about Vayikra Perek Yud Zayin? Again, Dvarim Perek Yud Beis, that's for sure the Machlokes. What about Vayikra Perek Yud Zayin? The way the Ramban learns, it's this Machlokes. It's the identical Machlokes Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. There's two drachim how to learn Dvarim Yud Beis. There's two drachim how to learn Vayikra Yud Zayin. But as it relates to the Rambam sheet, the Rambam said no. Dvarim Yud Beis, yeah, that's the Machlokes Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. That's Chulin Daf Yud Zayin. But as it relates to Vayikra Perek Yud Zayin, not to be confused with Chulin Daf Yud Zayin, as it relates to Vayikra Perek Yud Zayin, there's one derech. I think there's one mahalach how to learn it. What the pasuk is saying is there's an Isser Shchutei Chutz not only for Kachim, there's an Isser Shchutei Chutz for Chulin as well. That was something that was negated when the Yidden were in the Midbar. It'd be true for Rabbi Yishmael, for sure. But the Rambam says, I hold like Rabbi Akiva, and I believe that it would be true in the world. It would be true in the world of Rabbi Akiva as well. So here's the question. The question is, Bishloim, according to the Ramban, that the Isser Shchutei Chutz B'Chulin is in Rabbi Yishmael. So I understand a little bit what the Isser is. The Isser is some thing related to the fact they weren't allowed to eat Basa Taiva. Like now they eat Basa Taiva. So now you can't eat Basa Taiva, you can't even shecht Basa Taiva. And if you shecht it, you're ready to be Chayv Kars. But in the Rambam's world, that this is true even al Libid Rabbi Akiva, what's Pashib Shah? I'm allowed to eat Basa Taiva. I can even eat Basa Nechira. But if I shecht, so if I go deer hunting, right, and I am a sharpshooter, and I nail the deer literally between the eyes, boom, I could do that. That's something, I mean, I ain't Shuvas Neid Behuda about Jews hunting, right? But that's something that theoretically I'm allowed to do. But in terms of shchita, that's something I'm not allowed to do. What would be Pashib Shat? So Emma says, I saw the Netziv in his Hemik Dover, in his Pirush Al HaTorah, says, and l'chayr it's Pashit. He says something very beautiful. He says, I believe it's the Rambam L'Shitasa. We know that the Rambam has a Shita Mechudeshes in the world of Tamei HaKarbanos. Rambam says it in his Chelik Shlishi of the Meira, and the Ramban brings in the beginning of Vayikra, and he was very unhappy with it. Kiyodua, we've spoken about this countless times. But the Rambam says that the whole Yesod of Karbanos was to be marchik the Yidden from Avodah Zarah. The Yidden in the Midbar were in the Yidden in Mitzrayim were steeped in the Avodah Zarah of the culture of the Egyptians. And as a result, this was something that was very much a part of them. And the Rambam says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the Yidden a parish of Karbanos, and the purpose, the objective of the parish of the Karbanos was, through that, to distance them, to be merachik them a little bit from the Avodah Zarah that they were steeped in. But the Rambam says that was the Yesod of the Karbanos. The Ramban says if that's the case, so it comes out the whole Indian of Karbanos is just to be merachik us from all these shtusim. So has the Torah talk about a rech nichayach? Right? The Ramban asks all the kashas that he asks. One thing is clear: the parsha of Shchutei Chutz for sure is related to this Indian. Now you know that. It's a mefurish pasuk in the Torah. The Torah cannot have been more clear. The Torah says, what's the inyan of the Issa Shchutei Chutz? L'man asher yaviu b'nei Yisrael ezevchem asher b'soivchen al pnei ha'sadeh. Right, that's what we're trying to accomplish. V'lo yizbechu oid ezevchem la'si'irim asher em zoynim achareim. What does la'si'irim mean? Zok Rashi la'shedim. Like this, by you making sure there's not going to be an Issa Shchutei Chutz, you'll be prevented from ever going ahead and bringing karbanos to the shedim. The Issa Shchutei Chutz is related to what, Zok the Torah? It's related to the fact that we don't want you bringing karbanos. Why aren't you doing shchitas for Avodah Zarah? That's the whole Indian. Whether you learn Tamei HaKarbanos like the Rambam or the Ramban, or like Rameh Simcha in his Akdama to Vayikra that we mentioned so many times, who's Machriya. He says, Ani Achriya Beineim, right? Or like the Chassam Sofer who had his Mechudish understanding what the Rambam meant. Dvarim Atikim Vein Kana Makom Lahach. But one thing is clear, when it comes to Shchutei Chutz, the Torah was mefarish what the issue is. The issue is, we don't want you shechting to the Shedim. And like this, by us telling you Shchutei Chutz, like this you're going to be Nizar. Namal, until we learn today's daf, I think, we were always of the opinion that we're so worried you're not going to shecht the seirim. So you know what we say? If you have kachim, don't shecht it b'chutz. No to shecht in the Beis HaMikdash. You shecht in the Beis HaMikdash, you're shechting it l'Hashem. You're not going to be shechting the seirim. But you know what emerges from today's rei? In Shitas HaRambam for sure, the Rambam held this chashash of la yizbechu oides of chem la seirim was so prevalent that you know what the Eibishter said? Full stop, no shchita in the midbar. Gamar, it's not happening. Basa Taiva, in Rabbi Shmuel's world, Rabbi Akiva says, no, I'm not going to tell you Basa Taiva, I'm not going to go that. But shchita is out. You're not shecht, it's not happening. This is not something you're going to do. You're not going to be able to shecht. And the reason is because I'm afraid that if you're going to shecht, you're going to go ahead and you're going to shecht the seirim. How do I know that's the pshat zokt in the sense? That's what the pasuk says. The pasuk says clearly, the whole idea is to prevent. Now, once Yidden came into Eretz Yisrael, that was manifest only by Mukdashim HaKasim Adaber. But when the Yidden went in the Midbar, and it could be it's because they had just left Mitzrayim. I mean, we can come up with a svar of maybe why it would have been that way during the 40 years that the Yidden went in the Midbar. But the point is, the whole Isser was related to and that is a reason to go ahead and to prohibit a shchita. If that's the reason to go ahead and prohibit a shchita, mehecha taste, it has to be for shchita's kachim. It's something that theoretically could be for shchita's chulin as well. But the bottom line is, for sure in the Rambam's world, the Rambam l'shitasai, who very much touched up all these halachas based on this Havana, this understanding. It's so geschmack why the Rambam would hold that even in Rabbi Akiva's world, right, it doesn't make any sense. Rabbi Akiva's world, I could do nechir wherever I want, but shchita I can't? Yes. Shchita, there's a concern. That's the whole point. That's only a concern when it comes to zvicha. When it comes to, deer hunting, that's not something I'm worried about. And as a result, over there, you want to do that b'chutz, do it b'chutz. That's not going to lead you to shecht l'seirim. The chash of shechting l'seirim was such an issue, al kapanim during the 40 years in the Midbar, that it was something that was negeya not only the shechting of kachim, but it was something that was negay, the shechting of Chulin as well. Just one other point, to say this with a slightly different nusach. We mentioned so many times in the course of the daf that the machlokes Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Akiva is, according to Rabbi Shmuel, there was an Issa Basa Taiva for 40 years in the Midbar, and when they came to Yisrael, they got a heter. Now you're allowed to eat Basa Taiva. Whereas according to Rabbi Akiva, they were allowed to eat Basa Nechir where there was a heter. And when the Yidden came into Eretz Yisrael, now all of a sudden it was neschadish, all of a sudden it was Neschadish Isser, right? It was Neschadish and Isser. Now all of a sudden you're not allowed to eat bas and achira. Now all of a sudden you have to shech. I think in the Rambam's understanding, although it's true what we just said, but I think the knetch is a little bit different. I think in the Rambam's world, even Rabbi Akiva understood the halach of bas and achira as being Isser. The whole point of it is we don't want shchita michutz lamachna. That's not something that's going to happen. You know why? Because and as a result, this is not something that I think Sai Rabbi Yishmael and Sai Rabbi Akiva started from that point. There's not going to be shchita schutz afilu chulin in the midbar because of a concern it may lead to the shaila is now what? Okay, so you can't shech bachutz. So what does that mean? Oh, Rabbi Shmuel said that means you're not eating basa taiva. What do you think it means? That means you want to bring you want to eat flesh, bring a carbon. Rabbi Kiva says no. It just means I think that's too harsh. I think that means that if you want to do a shchita, you're going to have to bring a carbon. But you want to eat basa nechir, you could eat a basa nechir. Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Akiva are both coming from a place of Isser. They both learned Vayikra Yud Zayin, the parish of Shchutei Chutz, the same way. The question was now what? What's the next step? Did the Isser Shchutei Chutz bechulin mean I can't eat basa taiva? That's the logical mahalach. That's Rabbi Shmuel said. That's what the Rishonim say is for sure. Yoisa Mashman the Pshutei Shel Mikra. Rabbi Kiva says, no, I'm going to tell you a blitzadig chiddush. I'm going to tell you the Issa Shchutei Chutz. You know what that resulted in? What that resulted in was that if you want to go ahead and you want to eat bas and achira, I'm going to let you eat bas and achira. I'm not going to take away Shchita Chulin and say you can't eat bas and taiv. What I'm going to say is, you want to eat bas and achira, you can eat bas and achira. Shchita Chulin? Nah, I'm sorry. Shchita is only going to happen in the Beis HaMikdash. If it's not in the Beis HaMikdash, it's not going to be okay. But I think one of the big chedushim of this raid, again, it's a Mefurish Rashi in Tosfos and Chulin Tazayin, it's a Mefurish Rashi in Ramban and Parshas Achrimos, it's a Mefurish Ram in Perek Dal Hilchos Shchitas. It's not such a chiddush, but what's coming out over here is there's a parsha of Shchutei Chutz that we always thought for sure b'muktashim hakasam adaber, but really when you go through the sugi a little bit better, there's a whole nother derech. The Ramban said it only Rabbi Yishmael, the Rambam said it Sayin Rabbi Yishmael and Sayin Rabbi Akiva, and that is there was an Issa when the Yid were in the Midbar al Kopan, not a halacha l'deiros. But when the Yid were in the midbar, there was an isser to go and to shecht chulin bachutz. I think maybe you can make a diak, and we'll end with this, and that is in the parish of Shchutei Chutz. So the pasuk says very clearly, Ish mi beis Yisrael, asher yishchat shor oy kesef oy eis b'machane, oy asher yishchat michutz lamachane. Val pesach oy moy lehevioy lahakriv korban lashem. Says the pasuk that's not okay. L'man asher yaviu b'nei Yisrael esefchem asher him zoivchen al pnei asada vehevium lashem al pesach oy moy al koyin v'zovchu zivchei shlomim lashem oisam. You shouldn't do this. What you should do is bring it to the koyin and bring this Fa'ashlomim. Okay? V'aleim toiman, the parsha of Allah schutz, ish mi beis Yisrael, u'menager asher yoga b'soicham, asher yala oila oizavach, he's going to bring an oila or a zavach, he's going to bring either a carbon oila, or he's going to bring a zavach. What's a zavach? We know a zavach is always a carbon shlomim. Why is it that in the parsha of Shchutei Chutz, what does the Torah say? No, don't bring about chutz, bring the shlomim in the Beis HaMikdash. But when it comes to Allah's chutz, we're talking about an oila or a shlomim. Why by Shchutei Chutz is it a shlomim dafka, and by Allah's chutz is it an oila or a zavach? Kipshutai, this is a parasha of B'mukdash Makasim Adaber, the way Rashi learns. So the shlomim don't shech bachutz, bring it inside, and the oila and the shlomim don't be maila bachutz, be maila inside. Don't shech the oila or the shlomim outside, and don't be milo the oil of the shlamim outside. But the way the Rambam learns, and the way the Ramban is also learning, Pshutei Shel Mikra Bin and Shitas Rabbi Yishmael, that really the parasha of Shchutei Chutz is a parasha of Chulin. It's a parsha of Chulin. So what's the Torah telling you? The Torah is telling you want to eat a shtik flesh. Don't just eat a shtik flesh. Bring it as a carbon. Which carbon? There's only one option. We said it's only the shlamim, because the only two carbonas that were brought in Edom and Adava were the oil and the shlamim, and the only one of those two where you're getting a little meat from it is the carbon shlamim. Says look, the Torah that I'm telling you, you're not allowed to do it. That's not what you should do. Oh, you want a piece of meat? Oh, but the second parish is already a parish of Allah's chutz. You start kachim, could be an oila, it could be anything else for that matter either. But the bottom line is, the reason there's a dog of shlamim dafk in the parish of Shchutei Shchitei Chutz. 2 psukim later, it's the Oilo Zavach, because the Parsha of Shchitei Chutz is a Parsha of Shchitas Chulin, and in the Parsha of Shchitas Chulin, this is the way it is. As it relates to Allah's Chutz, that's already a different Parsha. It's going to be different. Just to end with one last Ara. I know I said we're going to end with this. We'll end with one last Ara. The last Gemara that we learned together. So the Gemara said something very interesting. Right? The Gemara was handling all these different sakinim, these knives with all these pgimis. It is a good pgam. It's not a good pgam. And then the Gemara says, Rav Acha Breder Rav Avia told Rav Ashi, what if I have a knife and it's damya lesasa? It's mamish. It's like a saw. It's saw, but it's more like fuzzy because it was shaven down a little bit. It's not mamish a problem. So Rav Ashi said, oh, that? Man, I wish you'd give me a piece of meat. I would eat it this second. A peladig Gemara of Ashi. It sounds like a fresser. Like, what's going on over here? I wish somebody would give it to me. So I saw Rabbi Margolis. I mean, you know, this is where you go with a Gemara like this, right? In the Sefer Netzotzir, he says, Zachrani. I remember I once heard of Pshat based on a Medrash. The Medrash says as follows. The Medrash says, Omar Rav Yudin bar Rav Shimon. Rav Yudin bar Rav Shimon said, Behemois v'levyasan hin kenigin shal tzadikim l'asad lavai. There's going to be a match, literally, a match. It's going to be the Leviathan going up against the Behemoth. And he says all the tzaddikim are going to be in this stadium, in this arena, and they're going to be watching. And this is going to be this incredible, incredible event that's going to go on. It's going to be such an amazing event. And only people that didn't see these matches are going to be the ones that are going to be invited to see it. In the case of him, the match goes on, and the Medrash says, how's this going to end? Like, usually, you want to have a little suspense, but I guess, in case we're not invited, so we might as well know. So exactly how is this going to go down? He says the behemoth is going to take his horns, and he's going to rip into the Leviathan. And the Leviathan is going to take his sampirav, right? He's going to take his fins, and he's going to whack out the behemoth. And then the Olam's going to sit together, and they're going to have a Suda. They're going to eat from the behemoth, the shayrabar, and they're going to eat from the Leviathan. So you wonder how the shayrabar and the Leviathan is going to play itself out. It's going to start off with a game, and then afterwards, after they get killed in this way, everyone's going to sit down. Zok the Medrash. Chachamim say, Zu shchitik sheri? You can't eat a shayrabar. What's that? How do you eat the shayrabar? The Leviathan, when he attacked it, right? Blindside, whacked him out. He's out for the count, tore his ACL and all, and now you're going to go ahead and you're going to eat it? You can't do that. It's a Mishnah. Hakol shoichten, upakol shoichten, ula'olam shoichten. Mamish unzere Mishnah. Chutz mi magol, kotzev ha-megera, shenayim im neishein choyken. And if you look at the Noisek Helam of the Medrash, said, this is a megera. This is like the sword. There's no way it's going to be okay. Amar Abban bar Kahanas, Rabbi Bar Kahanas said, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Torah chadasha me'iti teitze, Chiddush Torah me'iti teitze. It's a Chiddush. Really, it shouldn't be okay. But there's going to be a Chiddush HaTorah that in that instance, it's going to be fine. So Rabbi Margolis said, Shamati, I heard, that when Rav Acha Breder Rav Avia asked Rav Ashi, Damya l'sasa mai. He says, what would be if you go ahead and you shech the animal with this Damya l'sasa? It's like the saw. Is it okay? Is it not okay? So Rav Ashi responded, he says, I'm waiting for the day where we're going to get to eat from a meat that's going to have a shchita, that's going to be damya l'sasa, it's going to be like the Megera. This is the sharabar that tzaddikim are going to be zeicha to eat. L'asad lavai. This was the man yov mi busy. He didn't want a piece of meat. But Rabbi Margolis, who's the ultimate riddle solver, he said this is a remes ulai to this medrash that says that l'asad lavai, the sharabar, that great suda that the tzaddikim are going to eat from, is going to come about from azas or shchita.